What do you see as the biggest challenge for policymakers and practitioners in development cooperation in the coming years?
I can only address the first part, which is policymakers, because my organization, the IPU, represents parliamentarians in both developed and developing countries. And the biggest challenge for them remains two levels. One is how do they understand each other? They're not yet on the same page. But more importantly, going forward, the SDGs framework, which will be at the core of what we call the post-2015, will bring about an agenda that is no longer an agenda for developing countries, such as the MDGs were, but that is universal in scope. So that means there is changes that have to happen within the developed countries themselves. So the policymakers in the area of development cooperation. And so policymakers in developed countries will have to assume more responsibility, and they will have to better understand what this agenda is all about. One concern we have right now is that there is little appreciation or buy-in for what's happening with the SDGs in the developed countries and definitely in the parliaments. So it's one of our objectives also to try to educate that side of the world about this new agenda. Now, this is important because development cooperation itself has changed. It's no longer about aid, it's about taxes, it's about natural resource industries, it's about a whole set of issues that developed countries have a strong influence on, and that they have to influence beginning in their own countries again. It's not just for developing countries to look at. I'll give you an example. Fossil fuel subsidies. Until recently, you would have thought that is nothing to do with development cooperation. It has to do with energy policies and whatnot. But in fact, it's key that under this new agenda, that become part of this discussion of development cooperation, because if they can, developed countries can cut those subsidies, then they change the entire market system for green energies that will become more affordable, and that will benefit the whole world, both developing and developed. And with that, we get on the course, for example, towards doing something for climate change. So I wanted to highlight that this symmetry has to be improved between the two sides, developed and developing, and the policymakers have to play a central role in that.
How could progress be measured?
That is always where things, let's say, get complicated, because there's not a single measurement, a single way to go about it. We often, if I look at the MDGs again, they were mainly quantitative indicators of progress. For example, there was an indicator on the number of women in parliament, in politics, that was a number, in fact, a very factual, quantitative indicator, and there was one way of measuring progress towards women empowerment. I think going forward we need more qualitative indicators. We are much more focused now on measuring the actual results of development cooperation, and that means not just putting more kids in school, for example, but do they learn something? Was what the education actually delivered to them actually of good quality, so that they come out fully empowered, both as citizens as workers. So when it comes to the role of parliaments, that also has to figure large in this picture. That too has to be measured. Parliaments lag behind in terms of their capacities and their ability to influence the policy process and to exercise their accountability role. And so we will be looking for strong measurements of that as well.
Why is monitoring and accountability of development cooperation so important?
Nothing happens without it. There is no, the weaker the accountability, the weaker the implementation. If there is anything certain in this whole business, is that the two are correlated. And the stronger the accountability system, the more you make likely it is that things actually will happen. Now, there are different kinds of accountability. and this is what we're talking about in this meeting. The bottom line is that you need to have total transparency. You need to have all actors come together and assume responsibility. If that doesn't happen, then you cannot just attribute a responsibility to somebody. You have to assume the responsibility. And ultimately, all of this has to be not just for its own sake, but it has to correlate to the results. So you have to be able to show those results. So accountability is the crux of the matter, in a way. The problem, of course, is that at the global level, there's very weak accountability systems. They're stronger at the national level, and again, that's where parliaments can play a fundamental role, because it is basically the only institutional government that has that inscribed in its own genetic code, if you want, that they exist to do oversight. And so we need to strengthen the capacities of parliaments to play that role. And that will be one of the key pillars of this whole system of accountability that we're trying to build here.